That's 900.5 days to the end of the month. May I ask you to contrast that with the European Union and their Unity Project, or the North American Free Trade Area, or should we talk about ASEAN? Ladies and gentlemen, we have a baby, but the good news is that our baby isn't a complacent baby. Our baby is an extremely active baby, and on top of that, we're going to turbocharge our baby. Welcome to the first plenary session of the 2023 Afreximbank Annual Meetings, which is a special gathering this year because this baby is also 30 years old. It is a happy, hearty anniversary and a special thanks to the forefathers. I think it was October 1993 in Abuja that they set their foresight, foretold that as Africans we needed to have our own goods, sit on our shelves and to feed ourselves and nourish our people. And for that, we needed Afreximbank. And it also gives me great pleasure to say, President Obasanjo, we salute you for your vision, for your foresight. Allow me to introduce our panel for our discussion today. May I call upon His Excellency Ambassador Albert Muchanga, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining, the African Union. Ms. Flori Liza, President and CEO of Corporate Council on Africa. Dr. Asmani Asfour, President, African Business Council. And last but not least, Otunbani Adebayo, former Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment from Nigeria. Before we start, we're going to introduce to you a speech by Pamela Cook-Hamilton, Executive Director, the International Trade Center. Please listen in.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency Professor Orama, let me start by expressing my heartfelt appreciation to you for extending this gracious invitation and for the long-standing close partnership that has flourished between our two organizations. It's an honor to address this esteemed gathering at the Afreximbank Annual General Meetings. Let me take a moment to congratulate the bank for the 30 years dedication to Africa's regional integration process and to acknowledge the remarkable work that Afreximbank has done in undertaking to support the growing African business sector. This commitment to private sector development and particularly to enterprise competitiveness is a shared value between our organizations, and we recognize the immense importance of empowering and enabling these enterprises, particularly the MSMEs, to thrive in the global marketplace. Under your visionary leadership, Mr. President, Afreximbank has become a beacon of hope and support for businesses and the entire private sector across Africa, specifically now under the AfCFTA. Since assuming office, you have brought about significant change and progress, particularly in fostering closer ties between Africa and the Caribbean, my home region. The first ever Africa-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum in Barbados in September 2022 was a remarkable success in building bridges and opening doors, and ITC is proud to have been a partner in this journey. This effort has strengthened regional integration, created new opportunities, and kick-started a new promising era of economic cooperation between these regions. You continue to have ITC's full support to transform African-Caribbean trade and investment for shared prosperity. ITC is also partnering with Afreximbank through a corporate initiative to empower and enable MSMEs under the AfCFTA called One Trade Africa. A key achievement of our joint actions has been the development of capacity building programs that have proven instrumental in equipping African businesses with the necessary skills and knowledge to thrive in international trade. Let me highlight our joint How to Export with the AfCFTA training program, which has empowered over 6,000 MSMEs through our free online curriculum. These MSMEs form the backbone of economies in Africa and must be supported to take advantage of new market opportunities offered by the AfCFTA. Together, we have also partnered with business support organizations in 15 countries to deliver deep dive national AfCFTA training workshops tailored to the national context. Our institutions have collaborated at the policy level to support South Sudan's national export and investment strategy, a 5-year plan with 9 priority sectors. This strategy aims to boost trade and investment through strategic planning, government support, and private sector leadership. In the African Union Year of AfCFTA Acceleration, we look forward to advancing our private sector-driven cooperation to support businesses and MSMEs to participate in transformation of intra-African trade. Let me take this opportunity to applaud Afreximbank's vision and foresight in convening the flagship intra-African trade fairs. These fairs have created the largest single marketplace in Africa, connecting thousands of businesses and MSMEs. ITC is fully committed to making the 3rd edition of the IATF in Cairo a success. We have already started to train, mentor, and coach small businesses from across the continent to be ready to pitch trade and do businesses at trade fair. Together in Cairo, we will also convene a dedicated MSME masterclass on how to export and invest under the AfCFTA. This year, I also look forward to launching the first ever Pan-African Fashion Designers Cooperative with you at the Creative Africa Nexus Summit. This important initiative will provide designers in Africa with resources, services, and a collective voice to help each other and the industry. Critically, we look forward to working with the bank on the development of priority continental value chains, such as automotives, pharmaceuticals, and cotton textile. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, let me reiterate my deepest appreciation to Your Excellency Professor Orama for his exceptional leadership, and to the entire Afreximbank senior management teams. The International Trade Center remains committed to our partnership with Afreximbank, working hand in hand to achieve our shared goals of promoting economic growth, fostering regional integration, and creating opportunities for all. I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
This session is expected to reflect on the slow progress that we have seen in trying to drive forward the AfCFTA from that momentous moment on January 1, 2021. We are supposed to learn and reflect on the key lessons that have come through the past 2.5 years and what we can do about it as a result of those lessons. Remember to reiterate the importance of the AfCFTA in ensuring that we diversify African economies and we see the economic integration of Africa. And lastly, but not least, we want to explore the importance of strengthening public-private partnerships. Or put simply, we want to explore options and ensuring that the private sector is driving this process, and it is happening on the African continent. So I'm going to begin by talking politics with Commissioner Muchanga. Commissioner, when you and your colleagues sat and gave us the vision and you gave us the platform to act, I want to know if we have achieved the milestones, the targets that you set out at the beginning to where we are today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, let me join the earlier speakers in congratulating very warmly the African Export-Import Bank for attaining 30 years, 30 progressive years of existence with very substantial delivery to the development of Africa. I say so also with a personal note of satisfaction. In March 2018, assisted by my then principal advisor, Babajide Sodipo, I opened the doors for the African Continental Free Trade Area, rather, for the African Export-Import Bank to enter the policy organs of the African Union system. And since then, they are part of us, as seen by the flag here. Now, this is something which really needs to be looked at in terms of the issues emerging. The theme for this year is accelerated implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. And the theme now is turbocharging implementation of the agreement. And one of your opening statements was that there has been slow progress. And the earlier director of ceremony indicated that there is need for boldness and high ambition. And maybe I can add that visible results. Now, if you talk to some people, they give a qualification. If the African Continental Free Trade Area succeeds, the key word there is if, which suggests that in their minds, they are not very, very, very sure. And again, if you take survey results from the African Export-Import Bank, the International Trade Center, the Economic Commission for Africa, who are here, the message that comes out, and this is a survey of the African private sector's knowledge of the African Continental Free Trade Area. You take all these three survey results, and they've been doing that since 2021. Less than 50% of the African private sector understand the African Continental Free Trade Area. The next stage is that, as we are talking now, it's very, very, very difficult for one to say, these are the results, statistical results, of the contribution of the African Continental Free Trade Area to the growth of intra-African trade. So against that background, I would go with those who say, yes, maybe we need to give more energy to the process of implementation. And I'll come back to that later in the discussion so that I don't monopolize the floor. The issue of the role of the Council of Ministers, leadership. There's a role for them to play to ensure that it's turbocharged. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. If you were to reflect just a little bit on some of those key holdups in terms of achieving the targets that you wanted, what would you identify those are? I don't know. I can just maybe give us a couple.
Okay, now to give that a context, the former president of Niger is sitting right in front of me. The heads of state and government, when they rolled out the roadmap for the negotiation of the agreement establishing, that time it was called the Continental Free Trade Area, would not add the term African. They gave a deadline of December 2017. And when we met in Niger in December 2017, the chief negotiators were saying we cannot conclude the agreement. We still need some more time. And I said, I cannot go beyond the deadline issued by the heads of state and government. And two, if I allow that, it's going to reduce momentum. So I went to His Excellency the President and said, Your Excellency, this is the state of affairs. My recommendation is that when you address the ministers, African ministers of trade, you inform them very directly that you want them to sit on their own as ministers and look at all the brackets which are outstanding. And before they leave Niger, they should come and give you a concrete result. And that meeting should be restricted to only delegations with ministers. His Excellency accepted that recommendation. And we got a room, and my then principal advisor, Babajita Sodipo, was the gate man. He ensured that only ministers attended that meeting, plus the chairperson of the chief negotiators. Within 3 hours, all the brackets were removed. They were all removed. We went to the plenary, and I expected some sort of war to emerge. And indeed, there was a war. Some of the delegations were saying, what you did is to undermine the principle of sovereign equality of states. Others were pointing fingers at me. We are going to report you to our ministers. And I replied, I said, this principle of sovereign equality of states should be measured. There is also a sovereign obligation to exercise that principle of sovereign equality. Each member state is obliged to bring delegates of equal rank to the meetings that are taking place. If it's a ministerial meeting, there should be ministers. Chief negotiators, there should be chief negotiators. Similar for experts. There are some delegations which come. They start as senior experts, they are chief negotiators, they are ministers. That is not an obligation of sovereign equality. And for those of you who want to report me, feel free. And they did. And some of the ministers said, when we met them on the 12th ministerial meeting of the WTO in Argentina, my brother, my chief negotiator, came to report on what happened in Niger. And I told him what the commissioner did is right. If I was in his shoes, I would do exactly the same, because we have an historic obligation to conclude the negotiations.
Sure.
And others, because these are things you need to know. Others said, Commissioner, you write a letter to the chairperson, to the champion, saying what was agreed in Niger is null and void. I said, no. I do not report to one member state. I report to the collective whole. And at the end of the day, all those who are resisting accepted, and 18th March, we signed the agreement. So if now you see a situation where there is resistance, you need to use political instinct and say, politically, how do we move out of this logjam?
Yeah.
Logjam. If you don't do that, you stall.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Commissioner, for those insights. And I'm wondering, as I sit here, if one of those ministers who was in this cauldron is sitting here beside us.
From Nigeria, there was a lady minister. From Ghana, Alan, Minister Alan. From South Africa, I don't know if he's from here, Minister Patel. I don't know if they are here.
Thank you. Thank you. So it gives me an opportunity to come to former Minister Adebayo and ask the question. I think the Commissioner has been very frank. I think one of the things that we have said about the AfCFTA has been the political commitment, which has been absolutely unwavering. But I think inside, we see that inside that political commitment, there are also very key things that are considered by the technical people that they have to deal with. I want the insight of the former Minister of Trade from Nigeria to weigh in, number one, on those things that have held us, and perhaps you can pick up on a few things that the Commissioner has said. We have a few minutes, so I'll hurry you up a little bit.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I think one of the problems that we have had is the fact that each country has wanted to project their own interest over and beyond the collective interest. We find that when we meet, each of our colleagues always pushing the individual interests of their country. The Secretary General has had a very, very difficult time putting us all in line, because whenever we meet, like I said, individual interests come to the fore. For instance, we do recognize that this is an agreement, this is something that has to work for the benefit of all Nigerians. But I think, luckily I'm no longer an official minister, so I think I can speak a bit freely without getting into trouble. I think the major problem that we have had is the individual interests that we have been projecting for our countries. For instance, when we were talking about automotives, for instance, for example, we looked at it, and every country in Africa wants to assemble motor vehicles.
Yeah.
Every country cannot assemble motor vehicles. We try to sit down and look at a way by which we say, let us decide that, say, 4 or 5 countries will do the assembling of motor vehicles. We will look at other countries and they will do the components that will go into the motor vehicles as a way of compensating them so that they add value to what is being done. But even at that, to arrive at the number of countries, and those countries that will be the ones to produce the motor vehicles, is a problem, because every country is insistent that they are the ones that want to do that thing. So we have a major problem in that regard. I think going forward, a lot of work has to be done by the heads of state, and that because the original initiative is from the heads of state, they have looked at it. It is a dream that they have, that we should have a single African market, such that there's intra-trade between all the countries in Africa. So I believe that they should impress it more on the officials to look at the bigger picture as opposed to the smaller picture. Like I said, we have countries trying to protect their own turf.
Yes.
We have regional bodies, the ECOWASs, the different regional bodies as well. And, these are all areas that have interests that are ingrained.
Yeah.
So I think we have to get our mindset out of what we are used to and look at the bigger picture and see how we can actually make this
So we
thing
need to turbocharge the politics again, like we did at the beginning.
Indeed, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Dr. Asfo, I'm coming to you as a close, keen observer of the process that the politicians have been driving. And I have to recognize that in this instance, they have been far, far faster, I think in many cases, than business. But you have a closer view than me. Your observations.
So thank you very much. Let me first congratulate Afreximbank for 30 years of very, very, very strong support to the private sector, actually. So as Africa Business Council, established by the Heads of State Decision Summit to be the voice of the African private sector, our competitive founding vision is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization. And our membership includes all the RECs, business councils, chambers of commerce, private sector federations, union of industries, manufacturing associations, big corporates, SMEs, women entrepreneurs, and youth entrepreneurs. So our take for the AfCFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Area is really our flagship for Africa's prosperity. That's why we really envisage it. But how can we do it, and how can we reach there?
Yeah.
For the private sector, we see that our strategy is embedded in 3 pillars, 3 Ps. Private sector empowerment, policy advocacy, and product developments. When we're talking about policy advocacy, we need the governments to have incentives for the African private sector. When my investors, the Africa private sector, want to invest in a project, they would need really preferential treatment. They would need incentives. They would need enabling environment for the investment within the African continent. His Excellency, the champion of AfCFTA, in Niger, there is a lot of cattle, while there is no dairy products manufacturing. Milk is still imported from France. We need to see, if I bring the investors within Niger to invest, what are the enabling environment? How we can make incentives for our African investors? On another note, if we talk about healthcare industry, you know that in Africa, 80% are dying from cancer compared to 24% from the Western world, because there is no investment in healthcare industry in early diagnosis and treatment for cancer. My sister Nardos here is working very hard for the implementation of Africa Leaders for Health. The investors can go and invest, but what is the take from the politicians?
Yeah.
How can the public-private sector succeed?
Yeah.
And what is the governments really doing for preferring our African private sector? One of the advocacy pillars also we are working on is to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector. I cannot imagine that right now we are importing $50 billion per year food from outside the continent, while we have 60% arable land in Africa.
Yeah.
In order to invest, we need the private sector.
Absolutely, and in the process we are weakening our exchange rates because that $50 billion is in foreign exchange, another subject that we need to talk about. But very quickly, 2 points. One, the commissioner referred to a survey, and it's pointing a finger at you. I want your answer to that. Why, how is it possible that the very people who are intended to benefit from the AfCFTA do not know about the AfCFTA? And then secondly, are you pointing a finger at the politicians and saying, yes, you have talked, you have put the policy framework, but you have not done the practical work that enables us to create African goods and trade amongst ourselves?
So thank you very much, because with my first pillar about private sector empowerment, sensitization about AfCFTA is very important. Private sector is not homogeneous. We have the big corporates, and we have the SMEs, we have the women entrepreneurs, even we have the rural women across the whole Africa that are trying to sell their own vegetables and friends, and now they don't know about AfCFTA. The cross-border women traders, they don't know about AfCFTA. We have done several actually training programs, and that's when our strategic plan to do training programs and sensitization for the private sector to know about AfCFTA, but know also about the investment opportunities. So we have making now a mapping exercise, what's existing on the continent and how we can trade among ourselves. Like, for instance, pharmaceuticals. In Egypt, there is 165 pharmaceutical industry, but still we are importing from India and China. There is 400 manufacturers of medical consumables and supplies, and still importing from India and China. It is very important with reference to awareness, information, private sector. And for the third pillar is about product development. If we talk about trade, what are we going to trade among ourselves? Containers from China or made in Africa product that is quality, value added, standardized, harmonized, and quality.
Sure. So I was hoping that I'd given you an opportunity to talk about the many interviews I've done with you, trying to get the word out about the world, and you mentioning nothing. So I'll remember that in our next conversation. Flori, I made you listen to all of this because your members, the companies that you represent, have got the goods. And you hearing this story, I am wondering if you encountered a situation where you were ready, but you found the frameworks, the platforms for you to be able to get your members to bring in goods to trade on the continent are not as developed as you had hoped after annunciation of the arrival of the AfCFTA.
Well, thank you, and Excellencies, Dr. Arama, it's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here on behalf of Corporate Council on Africa. The question you ask, I first have to make sure people understand that CCA is composed of both U.S. and African companies, multinationals as well as SMEs. And I think that because of the unique bringing together of the private sector, both U.S. and African, with African governments, as well as with the U.S. government, CCA has been a long-time proponent of the AfCFTA and of the vision that the leaders of Africa have put in place for putting together what is now going to be one of the largest free trade markets and areas in the world, 1.3 billion people, I think $3.4 trillion economy. And Africa is at a point now where our members, both US and African, but especially the American companies, are asking, what does it mean? How can we take advantage of it? And the message that we are sending is that the AfCFTA it has moved fast and far. and that we really need to applaud the Africans for what they're doing. In terms of the opportunities, obviously, intra-African trade, which I think still stands at about 18%, there are so many ways that Africans, the people, the workers, the companies, can all benefit from AfCFTA. But while you're thinking about the implementation and how it can benefit African companies and African people, we hope that you will also look at how your partners outside of Africa can also come and work with you in a complementary way. So just as an example, American companies for many years, US companies are in Africa. People say, where are the American companies? They're here. Many have been here for 40, 50, 60 years and more. But they have had to engage with Africans sort of one country at a time.
Sure.
Yes, and so they're looking for how, under the AfCFTA, they can now have a continental strategy or even a regional strategy and pull the Africans into some of the global value chains, whether it's automobiles or pharmaceuticals. There's just so many opportunities there. So we hope that there'll be more of a chance. I'm looking at my brother Wamkele as they are implementing the current protocols and getting ready to announce some new protocols like the digital trade protocol, that there'll be a chance for your partners outside of Africa to also weigh in and provide some insights on how they would like to work with you, work with the Africans, and take advantage of what's happening here on the continent. There's no continent that has more opportunities now, especially in the post-COVID period, than Africa. And there's no issue that has to be addressed in the world, whether it's climate or food security, name it. There's no continent that is more important than Africa. So this is why I think this is a great time to be looking at AfCFTA, to be looking at the African continent.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm taking your statement, and I'm taking your statement, Africa as a country for me. I know that's a controversial statement for some people, but Africa as a country for me. Before I leave you, so we move on to the next point that I want us to discuss very quickly, is the key lessons of the past 2.5 years. Working with your members, if you were to pass on a message about how we can accelerate the implementation of the AfCFTA, maybe just an idea or a couple of ideas.
Well, you know, the thing is that in every key sector that is important for Africa's economic growth, whether it's in the health sector or in ICT and digital, agribusiness, manufacturing, in every one of those areas, there are so many opportunities. And I think that, you know, your partners are ready to step in and work with you. Dr. Asfor mentioned that Africa has 60% of the world's arable land, yet and still it is importing food. U.S. companies, farmers, and people in the agribusiness sector in the U.S. have some of the technologies and are looking for the kinds of partnerships that they can have in Africa. Obviously, agriculture, agribusiness, food security is a key area. But really, you know, any area you look at, I want to mention one. I remember pre-COVID, people were talking about trying to produce more vaccines here on the continent.
Yes.
And, you know, it was dismissed, to be frank. People were like, there's no way that you're going to be able to produce mRNA vaccines, the most advanced type of vaccines here. But what I'll note is that in the period where the supply chains broke down and where people were looking for new partners and building resiliency into their own supply chains, Africa is the place where they said, okay, now we can partner with companies here on the continent to produce vaccines. And I believe this is happening across many value chains. But I just use that one because 5 years ago, people would have said no way. But today, people are very much focused on that and know that Africa is the place that that can happen.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of work that's happening in South Africa, in Rwanda, as well as here in the West as well.
Yes, Senegal also.
Absolutely. Commissioner, I'm going to make you listen to some more lessons learned. Dr. Asfor, your key lessons that you've picked up in the last 2 years that if you gave to the Commissioner, hopefully he'll be able to implement very quickly and get some things moving.
So thank you very much. First, thanks very much for all the stakeholders and for AfCFTA, my brother Wamakili, my brother AU Commissioner, my brother Orama, who is really, my key issue is working all of us together because the private sector cannot work alone. And all the political arena, they cannot do or implement anything with the private sector. Thanks to President Orama, every time we ask him to support the private sector, he is there for us. Even within our strategic plan for sensitization workshops for the AfCFTA, he is ready to support. The whole issue is that when my brother Wamakili Mini puts the whole engagement strategy of private sector is great, we are all going to work together. That's the whole issue. There is a lot of protocols. Thank you very much for the women and women and youth, for the intellectual property, for the digital trade. All this cannot be done except with all our involvement as the real private sector. And here really, the private sector, as I mentioned, is homogeneous. So we need to empower all our private sector, SMEs, women, youth, for the Africa we want. The Africa we want is a prosperous Africa. It's not about alleviation of poverty. It's not about ending hunger. It's about really prosperous Africa. It's about well-nourished Africa. It's about well-educated Africa. Not like I always say, we want to end hunger. We want to have no illiteracy, no hunger, no poverty. No, why? The private sector is here for you. Not no poverty, wealthy Africa. Not no hunger, but well-nourished. Not illiteracy, but well-educated. This is the Africa we want. My sister, the women icon, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, under her leadership in African Union, we started the Africa we want, Africa 23 Development Agenda. We want to progress by our real integration. All of us come together, all of us have a role to play, and that's how we go together.
Sounds to me like you are happy, so I'm going to leave you there. But I want to give the former minister an opportunity, since he is now sort of sitting outside the circle a little bit and can speak freely. Just key things that we've picked up over the past 2.5 years that we can take forward and ensure that we are able to turbocharge apart from the politics.
Like I pointed out earlier, thank you very much. Like I pointed out earlier, I think the heads of state should get together and impress it upon their officials, upon their ministers, that we are looking at one Africa, not individual countries. One thing I've noticed, the Western world, the foreign countries outside of Africa, they are looking out for their interests, and they tend to come at each and every one of us individually, trying to give us advantages to take our minds away from what we're trying to do as Africa. We should resist these temptations. We should trade amongst ourselves. Let me give an example. Nigeria, that I come from, we are a net exporter of cement now, thanks to the policies put in place by President Obasanjo when he was president of Nigeria. Nigeria is a net exporter of cement now from being a net importer in the past. Other African countries, rather than buy cement from Nigeria, buy from Europe or buy from outside of Africa. And this goes for a lot of the products produced within Africa. So that's what you were pointing out.
Yes,
so
my brother, whatever on the African soil cannot be brought from outside the continent. That's what we want.
We should, amongst ourselves, increase the level of trade within Africa.
Yeah, I hear you, and I can tell you I've got a practical example. I remember there was a Ugandan trade delegation that was in South Africa, and we were talking with one young man who had brought his coffee, and I was asking him, how can I get this coffee? He says, I'm so sorry, my brother, I can't give it to you because the coffee you're drinking, most of the coffee you're drinking in South Africa comes from Europe. After European middlemen, that's when it finds itself to Southern Africa. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Commissioner, I've run out of time, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to wrap up, and I'm asking you specifically the issue around collaborating with the private sector, whether we have created strong enough platforms for us to be able to get the most that we can out of the engines of growth, that is the private sector?
I think I'll begin by saying that there has been a demonstration that Africa is a safe destination for investment. During the opening part, Akufo-Addo saluted Aliko Dangote. He committed $19 billion to invest in a factory, which means that he has confidence in Africa. So what I would like the private sector, African private sector, is that they should have greater confidence in Africa. There's work to be done here and there, but they cannot withhold anymore. They should invest. Money is not a problem. Last night I was scrolling on the wealth status of Africa, and the figures that came up is that Africa currently has 23 billionaires and about 328 central millionaires, those $100 million and above. So the money is there. It's the willingness that is not there. Come out of hiding, invest in Africa, invest in Africa, invest in Africa, and Africa will prosper.
Commissioner, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please help me in thanking our panel for an insightful conversation. Final comment from me is that perhaps let's have those very frank conversations about what needs to be done in order to change what we need to be done. And I think I'll take your last point, which is that no African product should go outside Africa and then come back into Africa, i.e. leaving African capital abroad. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your silence. Thank you for your insight. Mark?